that's a crucial mindset to have, to be open to the unknown. And that's part of the joys of this. Say you line up an event which is going to be around a week long. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know when and where you're going to be sleeping that first night most of the time. I think it's about being excited about that.
Welcome to Cycling Demystified, brought to you by Foundation Bike Fit and Frequency Cycle Works, the podcast where we help you take your cycling to the next level by sharing the knowledge from experienced bike fitters, mechanics, and the hidden players within the bike industry.
This week we're bringing you the first part of a two-part discussion all about how to prepare for an ultra-distance event. Our discussion itself went a bit ultra-distance, so we decided to split it into two parts. The first dives into preparing your mindset toolkit, understanding your real motivations to aid decision making, and why the ultra-distance community is so special. Part 2 will be released next week and bring more practical advice around bike fit setup, ride snacks, and how to train your fueling. So if you've signed up for an ultra event or you're keen to figure out if this is for you, listen on for some invaluable insights from two specialists in all things ultra-distance riding. Because we're talking all things ultra distance, we thought we'd get on some specialists on the subject to talk us through all the different discussions that are going on. So we've got Lee from Peak Bike Fitting. Hello, Lee.
Hello. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. And we've also got Sam from Acier.
Good pronunciation.
Did I say it right?
Perfect.
I had to think about it there.
Thanks for having me on too. Hi.
But, thanks guys for joining us today. You guys are both specialists in the area of ultra distance, been helping guys out find their way through. I guess this is quite having its moment, ultra distance, I'd say, and so this feels particularly topical. But it also feels like a rather new-ish genre, or there's a lot of people getting into the sport for the first time at this kind of level and looking for that kind of advice. So I think this is going to be a good one for all those people looking towards the next season. It's a kind of planning time at the moment. Certainly for you, Sam, I'm sure you're getting lots of athletes thinking about next season or this season.
Yeah, definitely, because certainly this time of year, we've seen, even over the past couple of weeks, a lot of the big events are starting to announce their dates and opening up entries for next year. So I think if you want to be part of those, now it's the time to make that commitment and make those choices. And it was interesting what you were saying about this being a relatively new pursuit, a new niche as well, because I was speaking to someone the other day and saying that my first event was 2017, and they seemed amazed that it was so long ago that even short period of time, like this space has come on so much, and that even from my side, just how much it's evolved, especially how much the standards gone up and everything around as well, which I think has contributed to the growth and the popularity as well. So it's, like you said, it seems to be having its moment, and hopefully people like me and Lee, who specialise in this area, are here to help people get the most out of their experience.
I was just going to say, I think it's quite daunting, the idea of having to commit to a race as the season closes, because obviously we're all in assumably fairly good condition because we've been racing or doing things obviously more when the weather's been nice. But yeah, like the idea of like having to commit now feels a bit scary. You're going into autumn, and it's definitely hit Sheffield like way too early. And I think, now I'd like to go through the winter, make sure that I'm still doing all that load, and then I'll be able to make a decision maybe in January where I feel like I need to make a New Year's silly resolution or something like that. But yeah, I think for me, personally, people, I don't know if you have this experience, Way, but every studio I've ever worked in, it's slightly quieter during the kind of like, especially when you get more towards Christmas, because people are focusing on next year, but they're kind of making their decisions next year as well. And I guess it's kind of a bad, because I'm saying I think like this as well, but I think it's good to get your bike fit and also training towards the end of the year sorted, where you know that you're going to be going into the new year with, some good base level training, no injury because you've actually had good training, good bike fit as well. And it's just exciting then, because you can look forward to the race rather than just think, oh, I'll prepare it after Christmas, after this kind of unknown time frame that you put in your head. Also, the Peak District specifically is a lot more beautiful in the winter. So
I do encourage people not to sort of look at that new year as a sort of that's the time which you start making your goals for what's happening next year and so on, because it's just in this context it's just an arbitrary date, and I think it really depends on when in the year you're you've got interest in events for. I mean, someone training for an event in April or May is very different to someone in August, September sort of time. I think there's a lot more, well, there's a lot you can be doing for both of those at this stage, but I think there's a lot more concentrated work which needs to be thought about at this time of year if your event's coming around earlier in the year. So leaving that until January and then realizing that maybe you need help with your training or you need to come up with a plan for it could be, well, it's not going to be too late, but the earlier you can start with these things, the better, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, some races are still going on, aren't they? So Trans-Pyrenees, is that still going? Yeah,
It
there's still
just
still
well,
riders.
it just finished over the weekend. There are two riders still out there. One who is his bike didn't turn up on time, so he had to head out on a hire bike. He didn't have the right attachments for his rear rack, so had to hack it. I'll say hack rather than bodge. Had to hack it together with some sellotape. So I believe it's still holding together. So it's one of these thinking on your feet things, which is so important.
Yeah.
I didn't want to mention a
Mm.
brand.
no, Telfin are really good. I remember when I
It
got
never
my
happens with
Cervelo,
Telford usually.
and as soon as actually even before T-Type came out, they already had the actual bracket that you needed for the dropout. It was really amazing. It's actually so they're always really on it. But yeah, I guess when you go into a race sometimes and you're swapping over things, it can get a bit confusing.
Yeah, to be fair, I think it was a final minute thing, and I think it was the day before they realised that his bike wasn't going to be in their time. I hope this is all correct, by the way.
I was going to say Bare Bones has just happened. So that's a really horrific bikepacking race around Wales. Usually horrendous weather and loads of elevation, lots of hiker bike. And we've also got further Scotland as well. That's another bikepacking one. So I think the bikepacking ones do tend to go further into the winter because I think they're all a little bit more mad. But yeah, super hard
Yeah,
races towards the end of the year.
yeah, but yeah, it does. Well, I think it's danger of being very Northern Hemisphere specific here, but that is where the majority of these events do go on, and there is. Yeah, I think that's probably another topic about sort of planning out your season and trying to make sure there is appropriate time between these events. But yeah, generally the majority for people in Europe, Northern Hemisphere, that its likelihood is that the key events are going to be somewhere between sort of April, May, and September, October.
Yeah. And is that something where when you take on an athlete, just seeing where they are in their season? I mean, I'm sure you probably get quite a few requests of people who are quite late into where their training phase maybe should be, and they're asking you for advice. It's always a tricky one as a coach to, do you take someone on? Do you not take them on? So now I
What?
guess is quite a nice time for you to be kind of picking your athletes in some ways.
Well, coincidentally, I've just taken someone on who's doing an event in 2 weeks' time.
Okay.
So yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah, we have to in those cases have to do the best with the amount of time which we have. Um, but it's generally I don't just like looking at events in isolation. I like to look at both the season ahead as a whole, and then even what the athlete wants to achieve in a longer term, because I think it's all important. I'm very big on this being. I think the support sometimes have this connotations of being sort of absolutely fresh yourself for one of these events and then spend the rest of the year recovering. But I think both the training, the events itself should be sustainable in terms of the rest of the athlete's life, and I'm very conscious that people have other commitments as well, that the majority of people I coach have full-time jobs. They can't be training 30 or 40 hours a week. So yeah, this sport's got to fit around the rest of their lives and what they want to achieve out of it. I mean, the events that they enter have got to be things which inspire them and motivate them. And it's it's a lot more than just the physical effort. It's the opportunity to go and visit places, see things, and get that broad experience out of it. And I just want to help people get the most of that out of that experience. The more well, it all comes down to enjoyment at the end of the day. It's our hobbies. It's what we do in our spare time. So it's got to be enjoyable.
Are people generally receptive to your kind of training plans? Like, are they all very kind of like working hard, or do you sometimes find that you have to kind of not push people a bit more, but like obviously it's quite a hard thing to embark on these things, and obviously initially they are looking for kind of advice as well as like actual practical stuff. But I mean, do you struggle with that sometimes, where you feel like you have to kind of chase it a little bit?
I find it may vary at certain times of year when it's. I think it's often the case that if a goal is quite immediate in the mind, then it's it seems to be for most people seems to be easier to picture what this next training session is leading up to that. Um, but even saying that, even if the event isn't in the immediate future, there's got to be, I mean, for each workout, for each time you exercise, there should be a goal for it, and it doesn't have to be absolutely thrashing yourself each time, because a recovery rider is there's a goal for that is to be in a better shape for the next higher intensity, next longer ride. And even sort of at this time of the year where maybe people are still deciding what they want to do next year, or they haven't got a immediate goal, immediate event until later into next year, I think there's still a lot of things that can be done to put people in the right place for that. Even if at the moment I'm telling a lot of people just to ride for enjoyment, because I think that is important as well, not to be stuck to a structured plan for 12 months a year where you feel it's too rigid. And that's where flexibility takes, well, both flexibility and working together with athletes to understand, goes back to what I was saying about enjoyment, that it's got to be a fulfilling process. And there's always a perfect in theory there may be a perfect training plan, but that never works in practice. Things are always going to come up, so it's for both sides to, I think, that constant feedback. It's a constant conversation to understand how the athlete feels, what they want to get out of it, and then for me to help them, guide them for the best way of achieving that.
I was just going to say, when do you find people actually come and seek out your services, Sam? Like, do they um, seek them out because they're trying to solve a particular problem, or they kind of know that they've taken on something pretty tough and challenging, and they need some help from the off?
Um, I think I think what's my unique selling point, my niche in this area is what I have to offer from being specific to ultra distance. And because the demands of these events are so multifaceted, that at the base of it, it's a physical pursuit. You've got to be able to ride a bicycle for a very long period of time. But then on top of that, there are these other demands of logistical logistical challenges, being able to sustain yourself on a bicycle for a number of days, being able to manage your sleep, your fatigue, and being in sort of having the right mental outset for that as well. And I think that's something which I try to ally both the experience I have with these events, doing it from all those years ago, since back in the day in 2017, when you can remember that far back. Um, and with applying that to what I've what I've been learning and what I continue to learn and research around applying basic training principles and the modern research relevant to this area which comes out, but always having an eye on how this applies to ultra distances and how then I can translate that in practice to what the athletes do. So I think that's what I've heard from a lot of athletes who come to me, that they've been looking for someone who both has that experience and specializes in this area. So yeah, there is a lot of very good cycling coaches out there who understand the basic principles, who are training a lot of people in the traditional pursuits like your weekend time trials and road races. But it's a case of applying that, having that experience, knowing what it feels like in these events, knowing what's important after day one, where zone two power on day one is it very soon becomes zone one after that, and so yeah, so I think it's both that experience and that specificity to the area, which I think I have the most to offer.
Can you talk a little bit more about the differences then in the training that you tend to prescribe to your athletes? Just talk to us some of the key differences that you would. I know it's more specific to an individual, but some of the key concepts that you need to take on if you're thinking about ultra distance, and what the differences are between that and say like a regular kind of if you're training for like a sportive or a road race, something like
Yeah, so I'll probably use the word specificity a few hundred times during my answer. So, but I think that's the key point with this, that this is it's a very different challenge, both physically and the other factors which I mentioned as well. So being able to train those as part of the process is so important. The general approach I take is typically, and it's sort of the traditional way to periodize a training approach in sort of looking over a number of months towards an event, is by firstly, well, this is applying to more traditional cycling events where the deciding factor is generally high power for a low period of time. So it's either sprinting to win a road race, a criterium, or doing a time trial. So it's maybe a 20-minute effort or 60-minute effort for a 10 mile or 25-mile time trial. Whereas what decides success in an ultra distance race is being able to hold a steady, consistent power for as long as possible. So that's the main sort of physiological response I look to try and promote and work on. So in going back, that traditional model means your that the specificity principle means essentially that the closer you come to the event, the more your training needs to look like the event. So that will mean doing higher intensity stuff closer to the event, and then further away, normally in the northern hemisphere, of your events in the summer, that means in the winter you'll be doing what everyone likes to call base miles. So you're prioritizing the basic aerobic fitness there, and then moving more to specific intensity as time goes on. Whereas in ultra distance, like I was saying, that's the key deciding factor, is to be able to ride a for a long period of time at a sustainable high power as possible over that time, which essentially means flipping that on its head. So focusing on the intensity first, and then increasing volume as the season goes on, as your event approaches. Um, but it's got to be a bit more nuanced than that, because that would imply that as your event's approaching, say you're planning on riding 14 hours a day for 6 days during your events, then you can't do that in a week, because it's not practical. People have lives and other commitments. So then it becomes about being clever about the training. So it does involve more volume generally, but then it's also looking at other skills which are really important, like, for example, if you're planning on sleeping out during an event, that you need to be familiar with your sleep system. You need to have practiced that, not in every ride, but it can be fitted in certain ways during the week, or maybe in more specific preparation rides. And yeah, getting familiar with riding a loaded bike with your setup. There will be occasions where it's important to do rides where you are fatigued beforehand, so you know what it's like waking up on day 2 and day 3 of these events, where it becomes less that focus on riding to power, but being able to ride to what is a sustainable feeling. And this concept of durability then plays in key there. So it's not a case of It's not as much a case of what you can do when you're fresh. It's how much that deteriorates over time, and be able to ride at a higher relative intensity when fatigued than otherwise. So yeah, it's a real sort of jigsaw bits trying to put together. So
Yep.
sort of practicing potentially each one of these in isolation, so that when the event comes around, there's nothing novel comes up, that you know what to expect, that you've experienced each one of these things, but then putting it together over a long period of time.
It sounds like ultra distance is basically a much broader jigsaw puzzle, as you like to say it, and requires a much broader range of skills and experiences that you
Yeah.
can take into your event. Obviously, if you're riding a sportive and you still need to be able to ride the bike and handle the bike, you need to know what equipment you're using, what nutrition you're going to be doing on the day. But for an ultra event, you're going to have to repeat that day after day after day. And so, knowing as much as you can about all aspects of your setup, your nutrition, yourself, your physiology, your bike fit, your training is crucial. So it sounds like that's really the big difference.
Yeah, definitely. There are various elements of support as well. I know a lot of the events I personally do are self-supported. That's the part of the sport which really appeals to me, because I think that then that becomes, it's not just a fitness test over however long. There's a lot to be gained from. I think, well, there are events where it is self-routed, so you get given checkpoints and have to navigate between them. So it's an element of plotting a route which suits your strengths and playing to that. And even on fixed routes, there's a lot of logistical elements which need to go in that, and in terms of knowing where the resupply points are, making sure that you're not caught out with not having food or water for a long period of time. So yeah, there's an infinite amount of work you can put in advance, and I think the smart person can play to that in terms of you can, well, more case of if you don't do your planning, you can find that you're losing a lot of time for various reasons. But yeah, it does mean that there's this, yeah, like you were saying, that this wider skill set which is needed for the sport.
Mm. Do you plan or get your athletes to think about the unplanned? We were talking earlier about how this fella turned up at the airport without a bike and had to sellotape his rack to his bike. That's problem solving
Yeah.
in action, and very much part and parcel of ultra distance events, I think. And so just your ability to make decisions about, should I do the event? Should I carry on? Should I, how can I get through this? Actually going outside of the plan itself seems to be another skill, but
Yes.
how do you teach it?
Yeah, it's hugely important to be able to think on your feet. Well, a lot of the psychological element of this area is controlling what you can control. So both understanding that, accepting it, and then putting it to practice. So good example is with the wind, the weather. You can't control what's going on with the weather, but so there's no point getting mad and shouting at the wind, but you can do something about it both in advance through foreseeing what conditions you're likely to face, being having a proper kit set up for that, and then putting on your rain jacket when it rains, and not waiting for it to get not waiting for yourself to get soaked through first. But I think your question was more about sort of, yeah, these unplanned things, unforeseen things. So it's partly sort of not, it's doing as much foresight as possible, so you are in the right place when potentially things which go wrong happen. But then also there's a lot that can be done during training as well. I think it's having this open, curious mindset and not being intimidated by the unknown, having that confidence in yourself that there's always things which happen which you couldn't have predicted. But if you have that tool set, partly through experience, through. That can come from your training rides as much as past events. Yeah, being prepared as possible, so you have both, yeah, the physical toolkit, the mental toolkit to be able to deal with it. So yeah, but then not dwelling on that too much, because if it hasn't happened yet, how do you know it's not going to happen? It's like yeah, it's like when every half an hour you think you've got a puncture, and then you stop and feel it, think, oh, it's actually fine. So it's sort of, unless it's actually gone down, then yeah.
I think you hit the key word, which was the unknown.
Mm.
And we were chatting earlier before the before the podcast about riders obsessing about FTP, which is the buzzword of the moment. It feels like for the last 5-10 years or so, every rider wants to measure their FTP, and I think it's because it is immeasurable. It is something that it offers a insight into what is quite complex, and people don't like the unknown, and it takes away the unknown. And yeah, we absolutely, preparing for events is really important, and trying to control as many things as we can is really important. But I feel like the key thing to be able to master is just being comfortable with the unknown when it comes to ultra distance, because everything is so unknown. Like, as soon as you mentioned earlier, as soon as you make a plan after day one, it usually just goes out the window. Whereas,
Yeah.
if you're crit racing, then yeah, you don't know what other people are going to be doing, but usually there's a team plan. You're going to move up at this point, you're going to attack at this point, and so on. And
I think that's a crucial mindset to have, to be open to the unknown, and uh, that's part of the joys of this. I mean, you say you line up an event which is going to be around a week long. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know, well, you don't know when and where you're going to be sleeping that first night most of the time. I think it's about being excited about that. That, like, it's this antithesis to day-to-day life, because I can tell you tonight I'm going to go to bed at 8 o'clock, um, but in my own bed, but but lining up in these events, you're doing something which you just wouldn't do in day-to-day life, and these experiences you have, the people you meet, the things which happen, they're just things which stick with you, and being open to that, not being intimidated by it. I think that's a key sort of switch I've had in my own personal mindset, which I really like to try and translate to people, that you can be in the start line sort of intimidated, and yeah, that not yeah, you can look at that both ways, like not knowing what's going to happen. Could be scary, it could be exciting, but I think I'll encourage people to try be excited by it, to trust that they are properly prepared, that they can deal with whatever circumstances. I mean, even that sleeping one, if it's nice outside, if you find a nice place to sleep and that's part of your plan, then yeah, you've got the equipment to deal with it. If not, if it rains, then you should be able to. I mean, if the worst thing happens, you can find some shelter indoors. You have the tools to be able to do that. You've done your planning, so you know there's a town in this place where there's potentially hotels. So it's not about planning exactly these things down to the minutiae, but it's having confidence in yourself that you have that toolkit to be able to solve these problems.
I think it is nice to have like a plan. Like, I mean, I guess like even like if you think about a holiday, when you plan a holiday, I was talking to someone the weekend about this. For me, almost the planning is more exciting as the ride itself, because I like to kind of think, oh, I'm obviously always overly ambitious, like most people. So I think, for example, when I did the Dells Divide this year, I was like, I'm going to do it in 47 hours. By the time I'm halfway, I should be here and here. And it was kind of on track for a while. So I was, in certain places. I got to York when I needed to be in York. I got to the coasts in Scarborough when I needed to get to Scarborough. But then there was like a boggy section for about 20 kilometers, and it took me like almost 12 hours. Like, it was the most horrendous time I've had on a bike. But I remember a guy who was riding with me, and we both stopped for fish and chips, and he was shivering, and he hadn't brought a big jacket. Like I always bring a jacket no matter what the weather, like a big warm jacket. You know, things like this, like preparation, expecting things like that to happen, because they invariably will. And I think, I mean, this is a bit of a different subject, but I think having stuff to help you, like if you fall over, for example, and you injure yourself, you can't move, you really need to be able to stay warm until you get help, or if you can get help, you know. And there are obviously people that, especially at the top end, the pointy end of the races, they don't really take anything because they're so confident in their ability to be able to get there. And there are a few ramifications of this. I don't really know of any people getting seriously injured because of the.
I've got one. Well, not well. Unfortunately, it wasn't anyone getting seriously injured, but like we mentioned earlier, it was just the Trans-Pyrenees going on last week. I was doing the commentary for Dot Watcher, so I was keeping a keen eye on it, and the winner of the race packed very lightly. I don't know how he fitted anything in his bags. The last night it got colder than expected, so he ended up wearing a bin bag, and yeah, you could say, oh, it was fine because he managed to get a solution and got to the end. But then I sort of question whether people, onlookers, are saying, oh, he's gone for or maybe people who are less experienced than him in a different sort of situation may look at his setup and say, oh, he's gone that light, I can go that light as well. I can just get a bin bag when it gets cold. But I think that's where individuality is such a key part to this as well, and understanding what I mean, everyone's got different tolerances. Like sleep's another big on clothing. I mean, yeah, this guy who you saw, Lee, he may have had a slightly higher body fat percentage, which means that he can cope with the cold a bit better. But
Mm.
then some
No,
people,
he just stood there shivering and scratched. That was it.
yeah, well, yeah, well, yeah, sort of proves that point that yeah, that you've got to respect your own requirements. If that means you need to carry a bit more,
Mm.
then if it makes you comfortable, which is a key part of this, then I mean, yeah, it's sort of a key bit with bike fitting as well, isn't
Mm.
it? Like comfort is performance. So
I think there is also a mentality that if you don't take all that stuff, then you will just carry on. You won't stop. You won't sleep because you're basically by default you are making sure that you are making it through the course because you can't stop. You can't, uh, fall asleep in like a random hut, or you can't camp outside. You just got to keep on going. So I think there is a bit of that where you're almost kind of trying to push
Mhm.
yourself to not be weak, to have to stop and to have to kind of take some rest. And I think it obviously can be a good decision, but it could also be quite detrimental to someone.
Yeah, I think it's got to be taken sort of in the
Mm.
wider context of safety there. I mean, in a shorter event, you may be able to have a better idea of what the weather conditions are going to be, but over a couple of days, and you've got to look at also what terrain you're going over. You're going to the mountains, and it can be 30
Mm.
degrees in the valley and freezing at the top. So you need to be prepared. I mean, yeah, that what you were saying about sort of forcing you to go on. I mean,
Mm.
then what happens when you can't go on anymore? Then then what do you do?
Mm.
It's yeah, it's I don't think there's a simple answer to this, and there's been talk about sort of mandatory kit,
Mm.
which is a lot more common in ultra running. In terms of you see often there's kit requirements for things like emergency bags. To be fair, most sort of responsible organisers, I mean, I find a lot of the mandatory kit is more about um, things like visibility around having bike lights and in reflective jackets and so on. But sort of question whether, especially some of these events which are going over mountain ranges and places where it's potentially cold, whether
Mm.
mandating people to have a warm layer is going to become more um, yeah more widespread. But then that opens up another wider debate and reminds me of sort of mandatory sleeping time as well. And then it's balancing how much it takes away from the challenge of these. I mean, yeah, there's arguments both ways, and I think it's maybe a bit of a too much of a debate to
Mm.
go into now. But it's one of these, yeah, it's this I think that the wider theme here is that safety that people need to be go into these things to understand that they need to be carrying enough to be safe.
I think that's definitely something that the culture and the community around ultra distance will inevitably decide upon. You know, what are the values that are important to that community, and that will dictate things like safety measures and so on. Just like, you know, in the Tour de France, it's the UCI, and they have a weight limit on
Yeah.
bikes, and originally that was a safety thing, but it's just something else now. But
Yeah. Well, this is quite sort of an interesting topic, which I was speaking to one of my athletes about recently, around sort of the rules in ultra distance cycling. Even if we're just going to take the self-supported bike packing style, that different events have different rules in terms of what counts as supported, unsupported, and so on. But to make this homogeneous around all the events, there's got to be who makes that decision. I
mm,
mean, you mentioned the UCI. There's no, well, thankfully UCI doesn't have control over bike packing for now.
yeah.
But should there be a body which comes in and gives sort of this set of consistent rules for all events that they can sign up to, so so that we are, well, potentially as that safety aspect as well, and then sort of having this, what's the problem around what defining supported, self-supported, but having some consistency across that, so that yeah, I think that's the way that the sport is heading to an extent. I think there's always going to be um, this sort of niche bit which needs to be. I'm trying to think of the right word for that sort of. I don't know, anarchic sort of
Yeah.
bit to it, which needs to be embraced and kept. But whether there is a place for sort of more coordination between organisers
Mm.
and having a sort of wider body overseeing events.
I think we're seeing a lot more in ultra distance
Yeah.
stuff, more specific possibly rather than events. We're getting, fastest known time for anyone that doesn't like FKTs. There's like a website where basically you have lots of different courses, different durations, very well known ones, and someone takes it upon themselves to do basically a time trial from the start to the finish. And I find that now the events are, it's becoming increasingly harder to get those kind of things because people like cross country professionals, like people elite, are now just like, oh well, I've done my kind of like summer season of like 1 2 hour races, high intensity. I'm going to go and try one of these FKTs in Devon or somewhere else. And I think like they're also now turning up to the races and stuff. So I think maybe before long it might become not necessarily more UCI, but like some of the times that are being putting out now. Like if you look back at like the Highland Trail 550 10 years ago, the FKTs, like it's ridiculous how much time is how little the time is now in comparison, because people are stopping less and it's just getting more and more competitive. It's remarkable, I think, actually, the differences.
Yeah, the standard has hugely risen. Yeah,
Mm.
the especially, yeah, sort of going back to all these years ago when I started doing this, I sort of compare my sort of personal performances, and although I very much discourage
Mm,
people to set goals and objectives over positioning, but I sort of compare like events where I've been top three, top five. Well, I say I sort of think even say 2 3 years
mm,
ago, a top three is now a top 10 in this sort of broadly similar event, just because that global standard has gone up. But I think there is a distinction between the sort of single day FKTs and then longer events with people coming in um, from these sort of more
mm,
professionalized areas of sport. I think it's more translatable to a single day effort like that. But
mm,
where you see sort of former professionals and so on doing these longer events, some of them really excel, and um, but then a lot, it seems sort of this 50-50 gamble. Either, well, they're always at
mm,
the front end of the field after day one or day two, but then whether they can manage their sleep, manage
mm,
themselves over those when it becomes a matter of days rather than hours, that's when the additional skills come in. And I've no doubt that
mm,
having that having that fitness there, that they are very well placed to do excellent in these events. but it's when the playing field becomes a bit more level, when it becomes over days rather than just hours.
I was going to ask, do you guys see a lot of people transferring over from kind of other cycling disciplines to the ultra distance? Maybe they've been riding for a while, been doing kind of other events, and then now they're giving ultra distance a go. Like, Lee, do you see that in the bike fit
Yeah,
studio?
I think it's people that generally go from road to gravel, then from gravel to mountain biking, because I think, I mean, that's the trajectory I went as well, actually. I used to mountain bike when I was a kid, but I think after my first event that was like, well, not first event, but one of the first bigger events, the Blenheim 600, that was a 600-kilometre race, very hilly in Wales. And I remember, yeah, having lots of post numbness and stuff. And I think because that was on a gravel bike, I thought, well, actually, I could get like a full suspension, like a cross country bike. And I think you're always trying to facilitate the new events that you want to do. And ultimately, there isn't like one bike. And I think people just want to do more events. And I think if you, for example, you're a bit sad of being on the roads. I think when I lived in London, I was really trying to get away from the roads because it's just lots of congestion all the time. So I got a gravel bike literally just because I wanted to get off the roads, and then I think I started enjoying that. And then the bike packing races was just so cool because it's a bit different to the road in terms of like where your concentration is. But we talk about that kind of flow state really just for a moment. And I think it's so easy to get into and tap into when you're mountain biking because you're concentrating on the trail, and you can't really quickly take your eyes off because you're usually on like a descent or like a hard climb. Whereas road cycling, you're interrupted by cars coming, so like you'll get into a really nice state, you'll be on a country lane, and all of a sudden you have the I guess it's a little bit different, but I think people have, rather than the kind of trajectory, I think they have different reasons why they get into it. And I think it's usually subjective to like if they've seen like a particular race, if they like the idea of the ethos of that particular race, because they're all fairly similar. But if you actually look at the branding and the way that they're kind of different, they do appeal to different types of people, and it's community. So once you get into it, you are very kind of hooked because you're kind of accepted. Doesn't matter who you are, like generally you're accepted, and you're just kind of exchanging kind of advice and information. And I got really attached to that with my first race, and I just thought this is definitely for me because I'm never going to be someone who is competitive in a Crystal Palace crit. I'm terrible at that kind of thing, but I can ride fairly hard for longer distances, and I like to think that I've got like a good kind of fortitude for things when things get tough. So it suits my particular personality, and I think it probably does suit quite a lot of people because you're not judged on your FTP like we were talking before. It's just really a way of getting into racing and feeling like you've really achieved something, but it's not down to your FTP or the chances of what could happen in a 1 hour race.
I think that community aspect is such a huge thing as well, that I think a lot of it is that because it's essentially, well, a lot of these events are essentially very long individual time trials. So there's very little, well, in some cases, nothing that you can do to control the outcome of other people's events. So there's not that shoulder to shoulder rivalry that there is in a road race where positioning is all important and so on. So that generates this community and this sense of camaraderie that they're all going through the same experience, and there's it's sort of this friendly rivalry. So at the end of the event, you've been through the same places, you've done the same thing. There's no point being antagonistic towards other people because it doesn't affect the sort of overall result. It comes down to focusing on going back to focusing on what you can control. What you can control is your own performance. So you focus on that first. I mean, you can. It's not 100% that way. There are some nuanced bits where potentially, especially with the tracker showing where other people are, there can be some nuanced tactics around that. But generally, the first thing is to employ a strategy which helps you from the start to the end in the quickest time possible, taking into account being sustainable for that full period of time, and that generates this community where people are happy to share experiences and celebrate each other's achievements, and it's a really positive part of this area.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of this episode. Tune in next week for the conclusion of this ultra distance discussion, where we bring you some practical bike fitting tips, fueling ideas, and reveal what our favourite ride snacks are. Don't miss it.
Suffering from numb hands, tingling toes, and any other persistent discomforts when you ride? These are all signs that your bike fit could be improved. If you're bike fit curious, get in touch with Wei or Matt by emailing info@foundation.fit or finding them on Instagram @FDN_bikefit. Finally, for all your bike servicing needs, custom dream bike or hand-built wheels, go to www.frequencycycleworks.com or find me on Instagram @frequencycycleworks. Until next time, keep on spinning.